A long time, forget trying to follow rules or following a program and reshape your environment so that the healthy choice is either easy or unavoidable. And the unhealthy choice is harder or impossible.
What is the key to human happiness?
Statistically speaking, there's probably 10 things we can do.
Dan Buettner, thank you for making time to do this.
A pleasure to be here.
Dan, what from your research and experience is the key to human happiness? If there was one, obviously there's a confluence of factors. If there was one thing a person could do in the modern world to create more happiness for themselves, what would that be?
Statistically speaking, there's probably 10 things we can do to increase our chances of happiness. So we're all sort of genetically dealt a hand. 40% of our happiness or lack thereof is dictated by those genes. Minnesota Twin Study established that. But the single most powerful thing of all the things at work is moving to a place where people around you are happier. And that's been shown if you follow immigrants from unhappy places like Southeast Asia or Africa to Canada, which is a happy place, or unhappy places like the Soviet bloc countries to Copenhagen, which is a happy place. People don't change anything about themselves. They just move and they report the happiness of their adoptive country, which often means a doubling of their happiness. So, I wrote a cover story for National Geographic and 2 books on happiness, on the things that actually show up in populations to move the dial in happiness. And moving is the most statistically powerful thing you can do to be happier.
What's the deal with Bhutan? I've been touting that Bhutan's like the happiest country in the planet for a while, and then I recently learned that is not the case.
It's not the case. They deserve credit for developing the metric. They funded the happiness index, which is actually a very good index designed by Nobel Prize winners. And, they have some of the fundamentals of happiness in place. I think generally Buddhism is a tool that can help you slow down and focus on the present. But at the end of the day, not enough of the Bhutanese have sufficient food and water and shelter and education and mobility and equal rights, actually, to fully be happy. So, when it comes to happiness, it's sort of like a cake recipe. You need the necessities. It's very hard to be happy if your belly's empty, or very hard to be happy if you don't have education, or if you don't have a roof over your head, or if you don't have health care, or if you don't have mobility. Those are really important, and they need to be covered. But what people don't realize is most Americans can cover those necessities with $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and then the other things we do to get happier provide diminishing returns. For example, making more money very quickly thins out as a happiness strategy after you're making more than, it used to be 75,000, but adjust that for inflation, it's probably more like $100,000. After 100,000 a year, you're not a heck of a lot happier with 200 than you were with 100. So you're much better off identifying a happy individual, a truly happy, giving, loving, well-adjusted individual, and bring him and her in your social network. And that has a measurable impact on your happiness.
What is your own journey of fulfillment look like, or happy? I feel like happiness is kind of like can feel like a little bit of a cheap, fleeting word.
Yeah, yes. So you're insightful. The happiness is a academically meaningless term, but sociologists can measure life satisfaction by asking you, Aaron, and I'm going to ask you this question. If you consider your life as a whole, your finances, your values, where you live, your health, what you've achieved and so forth. On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life?
8.
All right. I mean, that puts you slightly above average. Um, but the problem with that metric is you only remember about 2% of your life. You tend to remember the high points, you know, when you graduated from high school or college, or when you had your first great date, and you remember the low points, when you got dumped, or had a hard relationship time, and you remember what happened recently, usually about 24-hour recall. But if I ask you, and I'll ask you then, what did you have for dinner 2 weeks ago Tuesday?
No idea.
Exactly. So when I asked you that, evaluate your happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, you only remember fragments, extremes, and recents. It's called a recency bias. So to get at that more moment to moment happiness, sociologists uh, hook up a gadget to people and they ping you randomly throughout the day for several weeks, and they ask you what you're doing now and the happiness associated with that. And that's called affect happiness. And the things that tend to make us happier moment to moment are things like um, physical activity every day, sex has a big impact on that, a good night's sleep. The things that make us happiness, make us evaluate our lives better, life satisfaction, tend to have more to do with what we've achieved and the goals we set, and a feeling of giving back, and being surrounded by uh, relationships we've built, and those relationships nourishing us. So there's kind of two sets of factors that fuel what we call happiness. But if you break it down, there's different things that drive different facets of our happiness. And my work, my book was called The Blue Zones of Happiness, and it was a 2018 cover story of National Geographic, sought to identify statistically what exactly makes you happiness and happier, and what is hyperbole. And most of what we think drive happiness is misguided or just plain wrong.
You studied previously and wrote for National Geographic around the collapse of the Mayan empire, Mayan civilization, as well as the ancestral Puebloan people in like the Four Corners place. Is that right?
Yeah, the Anasazi, they're also called.
Anasazi, yeah. And something I'm very interested in, civilization and such, and the average time frame for a civilization to collapse, from what I've read and seen different places, around 250 years. And the United States will be at 250 years. That could be wrong. I think it varies quite widely. I think the averages, and please correct me if that's wrong. Uh, United States will be 250 years next year.
It's much longer, Aaron. The Maya civilization dates back to at least 350 BC, and it collapsed in 910 AD. So that's over 1,000 years. Same with the Mesopotamians, same with the Romans. Romans were around about 600, at least 600 years. So I wouldn't trigger alarm. That said, to your point, I mean, things are, civilization evolves much more quickly than it did now than it did back then. And a lot of the same things that uh, uh, precipitated the collapse of those society are in place today. And I agree with you that they're things we ought to be paying attention to.
Well, something that so I looked up like the kind of like the arc of society. It starts off pioneering, then conquest, then commerce, then affluence, then intellect, then decadence, and then just before it collapses, decadence. And within decadence is civic unity erodes, inequality rises, focus shifts to self-interest. This is a trend that I've read. I'd be curious your perspective on this. That is a marker of the step before collapse. So says what I read on the internet. Why do you think that is, that decadence is the step before collapse in a society, if that is in fact true?
Well, what's made the human species work has always been a cooperation between individuals. The caveman who was really good at hunting was way more likely to survive if he made an alliance with the other caveman who was good at building shelter or starting fires. And that's what made the society. So when you become self-centered, you lose that cooperation, and it's much more likely you have conflict. I think what you said, I've never heard that sort of progression, and I think it was very smart. By the way, I'm going to probably ask you to send it to me later. But in general, the arc starts out as a innovative society with that's disciplined and cooperative. Um, Agriculture, ancient civilizations, it's always been the domestication of agriculture, not hunting, but being able to grow crops. Why is that important? Because if you can grow crops and store grain and beans, you could then have the free time to develop art and civics and build monumental architecture and all the things we associate with civilization. And what invariably happens is you get this some class of people, a minimum, get an upper hand on the power, and they exploit the underclasses. We see this very clear with the Maya. We see it in the skeletons. The skeleton of the elite, which numbered about 2% of the total 10 million population, their skeletons were about a foot taller than the skeletons of the peasants growing the corn and building these 24-story temples. And what happens is that situation gets so severe that pretty soon the peasants just say, forget it, we're leaving. And that's what happened. That's what caused the collapse. They simply abandoned these big. There are other intervening things. Towards the end, there was an explosion in the number of wars. There was a drought, a climatic event. One might draw a parallel to global warming, but there was indeed a drought that moved through the Maya area beginning about the 7th century and also precipitated the collapse of the Anasazi in Arizona and Utah. But the end ultimately came with a certain amount of decadence and a certain forgetting of the disciplines and cooperation that made them great.
Do you see the arc of the United States tracking with the Maya culture in any way?
Yes.
In what ways?
Well, we overexploit the environment like the Maya did. For the past 20 years, there's been a clear disappearance of the middle class. So we're getting the rich are richer and the poor are poorer in a class society. We have this, you could stick your head in the sand and ignore it or gibber your way through it, but the climate's changing and it's causing all sorts of problems. Where I've been spending the last couple of weeks in Minnesota, Wisconsin, the air's so bad my dad had to go to the hospital. We've never seen that before, but it's also causing social tensions. And where I live not too far from you in Miami Beach, and we see, the strength of the hurricanes down in South Florida. The number of them and the severity keeps going up, and you can barely buy insurance. And similarly, in California, you see the wildfires. This is all very similar to the 8th century in Central America, when the Maya had overtaxed their farmland. They cut down the rainforest. That created a change in the microculture and precipitated hunger. And when people are hungry, it's very hard to rule them. And so you got uprisings, and the leaders, in order to deal with the uprising, they attacked neighboring cities to raid their grain stores, and mayhem broke out. The whole thing collapsed. And, we have rising tensions throughout the world. We have a underclass of people who are rising up against upper class. I mean, it doesn't matter what your politics are. Objectively, immigrants and poor people and people of different sexual persuasions are unhappy, and they're rising up. and the more powerful class is responding by beefing up the police and empowering ICE. So you get this tension, and that tension is not good. You think you can put a lid on it, but it's like a pressure cooker that just gets more pressurized and eventually it explodes.
How important is having some form of spiritual practice to longevity?
So my work is blue zones, and that's what I focus mostly on. I've written 4 New York Times New York Times best-selling articles and books on blue zones, and I have a book out now called The Blue Zones Kitchen: 100 one-pot meals to live to 100, which metabolizes all the insight on how to eat to 100, so you actually like it. And it's it's very clear that there's many factors that contribute to longevity. I identified 9 of them, and one of them has to do with spirituality. You can't measure spirituality. I know you had us, I think, very innovatively start this conversation with some breath work, and I think that calls to mind a certain spirituality, but you can't measure it. So if we can't measure it, I can't correlate it to longevity. But you can measure religiosity, which is simply measured by asking how often people go to church, temple, or mosque, or some other uh, faith-based community. And it's very clear that people are showing up to church, temple, or mosque are living about 4 years longer than people who don't. And it stands to reason if you're going to church, you have a spiritual life, or mosque or temple. So that's the extent I can tie the two together.
The reason I asked about spirituality or God or religion or any of that, the meaning of religion, like the etymology of religion is to connect. Religio comes from connect, I believe.
Yeah, to reconnect.
Yeah, from John Peugeot in our last conversation. A guy does like symbolism and things. But my feeling is that religion gives many people a story of purpose for themselves. And if you live in a culture where you feel alienated by that culture, or you feel lower class, or you feel like conflict, you feel like the 0.01% has everything and we have nothing, and we're outsiders, to have a story of a higher purpose or a God or something of the sort, or waking up in the morning and just having purpose in and of itself, seems like a very powerful driver for longevity. Is there something to that, like purpose for longevity?
So the original director of the National Institutes on Aging, his name is Robert Butler, and he examined the writings of people dating back 30 or 40 years ago, and he had certain words that indicated that people have life meaning in their life or sense of purpose, and other writings that was clear people were rudderless in their life. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm trying to figure it all out, et cetera, et cetera. And he found that the people whose writings indicated strong sense of purpose live about 8 years longer than people who are rudderless. And that was more or less replicated among nuns who lived in a convent in Mankato, Minnesota, many of whom made it to 100. And the ones who were made it into these old ages also were very content, found that their path to God was also their personal path. And then to tie to my Blue Zones work, in all Blue Zones, there's vocabulary for purpose, which is prominent in their lives. It's not a nice to have. In many cases, their purpose determines their profession, determines what they're doing with their free time, determines who their friends are. So yes, purpose is important.
How is your work with the Blue Zones and going to these places and research and all that stuff? How has it informed your own life? Is there any places where you feel like you have fallen short, or places where you personally struggle? And how do you navigate those parts within yourself? Is there any parts where you kind of break your own Blue Zone rules?
Blue Zones has no rules. This is a very different approach to longevity. Most of the other sort of longevity experts almost always have kind of a program for you, or a diet, or a supplement regimen, or a bunch of prescriptives. Go to the gym and pump iron, eat a lot of protein, whatever, take resveratrol. Uh, in, I found the populations, verified populations, where people are living about a decade longer than the average American, and that decade is without chronic disease. Those people don't do anything. They don't follow any rules. They just live their lives. And the insight, and it took me about 10 years to realize this, is that longevity or even health is almost never successfully pursued. The sort of American way of, I'm going to get healthy, I'm going to start going to the gym, and I'm going to eat this way. Maybe it's paleo, or maybe it's vegan, or maybe it's something in between. And I'm going to take these pills. And you see very clearly in the data that people kind of run out of gas after about 3 to 6 months. And when it comes to longevity, there's nothing you can do today or this week or even this year that has any bearing at all on whether or not you're alive and healthy in 2030. People who live a long time are doing the same small things every single day for decades, and they're doing them unconsciously. Why? Because they live in an environment that nudge their unconscious micro decisions for the long term. So if you want to live a long time, forget trying to follow rules or following a program, and reshape your environment so that the healthy choice is either easy or unavoidable, and the unhealthy choice is harder or not is or impossible. And not until people shift their thinking from rules and programs to ecosystems and environments are they going to live any longer. People in blue zones, they don't have great discipline. They don't meditate. They don't have a great sense of individual responsibility. They don't have better genes than we do. They don't do anything special except live their life. But when you look at their environment makes it very easy for them to make the right unconscious decisions. That's the way. That's what leads. So you asked me the question, and that was a 25-cent answer to a nickel question. Do I break my own rules? Okay, in blue zones, people are eating mostly a whole food plant-based diet. I get that I probably 90 to 95% there. People in blue zones are very careful about the people they surround themselves with, tended to be healthy, happy, caring people. And most of the people there, they tend to go to church. I don't really go to church. I should, but I don't. I go twice a year or something like that. Um, they move naturally. They downshift every day. I'm pretty good at that. I take a nap. I usually do happy hour with people. They drink a little bit. I certainly check that box. Have a glass or two of wine every day. Um, so, I'm about 90% compliant with the lifestyle of the blue zones.
There's a guy, you ever heard Bruce Lipton wrote Biology of Belief, like epigenetics is his thing. You familiar with him at all?
No,
Interesting guy.
I'm familiar with Lipton tea.
Yeah. Yeah, green tea is supposed to be good for you too. He's someone I've looked up to for a long time, wrote a popular book all around epigenetics. And one of the things that he mentioned in an interview that we did, I don't know, a year ago or so, was if you want to, he was a cellular biologist. And if you want to change the structure or function of a cell in a petri dish, you adjust the culture of the dish. You don't do anything to the cell itself. And it's kind of like what you're saying with the person. Like, we are in this culture or in this dish. And I think a lot of people are doing so much work within themselves, but they're still in the same culture. So what would be some ways that a person could adjust their environment to passively become healthier and lean towards greater longevity from your perspective?
Well, if your three best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's about 150% better chance that you'll be unhealthy yourself or overweight. So proactively surrounding yourself with people whose idea of recreation is, pickleball, or which you and I might do over at the Miami Golf Club there. or surfing or swimming or biking or gardening. That's all measurably contagious. Friends who care about you on a bad day, friends who it's not a bad idea to have a vegan or vegetarian friend because they're going to show you how to eat whole food, plant based, which is worth many years of life expectancy right there. So I would say the first environment to optimize is who you let in the room with you. It might be the most important decision you make. And while I wouldn't tell you to necessarily dump your unhealthy, unhappy friends, I will tell you the more time they spend around you, the more you're going to pick up their way of living. Number two, we all move about a dozen times in our adult neighborhood, and we can choose adult lives, and we can choose living in a suburb with a cul-de-sac where we're not going to get a hell of a lot of exercise, these car-based living situations, or you can move to a neighborhood that's walkable, where there's a sidewalk connecting neighbors, where you have very easy access to recreation and parks, easy access to healthy food. These are enormous drivers of what you actually do. And people don't see clearly. They think, oh, I'm gonna have Amazon send me this food or something. No, you got to be in an environment where this food is ubiquitous, and so many of our decisions are unconscious. And then a couple simple things for your home environment. Uh, I believe that most of us are on a seafood diet. We eat the food we see. So if we walk through our kitchen and there's a bag of chips with a clip on it on the counter, and we see them and we say, oh, I think I'm a little hungry. What are we reaching for? As opposed to establishing a junk food drawer that's out of the way and around the corner. So we're all going to bring junk food into our house. I bring junk food into my house, but if it's out of sight, not of mind, you're going to eat a hell of a lot less. And Cornell Food Lab proved this. This isn't just Dan Buettner shooting from the hip. Meanwhile, having a fruit bowl that's full in the most prominent spot in your kitchen. So every time you walk through your kitchen, you see that, peaches are fresh and cherries are fresh right now. If your bowl was full of that, it's easy to grab that. So these things make a big difference because we do them unconsciously and we do them for a long time.
There's the verse in the Bible, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, or kingdom of God, rather. One of the critiques I've heard of the diet associated with the Blue Zone is that it would be appropriate and naturally happen in a culture in poverty, or if there's not an abundance of resources, because meat is expensive, processed food is expensive, food that's made in a factory and put together and all that stuff. So it ends up leading, if you don't have a ton of resources, you'll naturally eat single ingredient foods that come from the ground. You'll eat more grains, you'll eat more things of the beans, rice, things of the sort.
And that's a critique? How is that a critique?
Not critique bad. It's just something that I've read, that it's more toward it would be appropriate for a culture. It would naturally arise in a culture that doesn't have great affluence. And just so happens that affluence can lead to health issues. Do you think that there is a way to merge a healthier, more longevity-based lifestyle that we could learn from someone that is, living maybe a less affluent lifestyle into an affluent culture, such as like a major city, New York City, Denver, LA, or is this something that's reserved for a village somewhere else in a far-off land?
Well, I'm rich and I eat my main consumption is beans. So now to your point, though, I try to stay away from telling people what to do, but I do know better than anybody else on the planet what the cultures of longevity actually ate over time. I led a 155 study meta-analysis, and I can tell you that what fueled, to your point, long-lived cultures over time is they ate a peasant diet. beans and grains and tubers like sweet potatoes and greens and nuts. And the cornerstone of every longevity diet is beans. Now, just to prove that affluent people can eat this diet, I created a line of food called Blue Zone's Kitchen, frozen food. And they are now in every Whole Foods in America. It's the top selling plant based food in America. I spent a year making them maniacally delicious. The reason that rich people are eating more meat, cheese, and eggs is because we don't put any of our culinary expertise into making beans taste good. We have these shitty, Boston baked beans or boring old lentils on our salad. In Blue Zones, they're geniuses making beans taste just as good as beef. And my book, this Blue Zone Kitchen One Pot Meals and Blue Zone Kitchen Frozen Food, I have spent years making sure the food is maniacally delicious. And when you put it side by side with meaty and processed foods, people actually like my food better. So it's not a question of affluence, it's a question of taste. As long as we can make food formulated for longevity taste as good as the meaty, cheesy, ultra processed alternative, we have a solution. And I think we've cracked that with Blue Zone's kitchens.
A lot of other things come from a culture that isn't affluent. Like if you are a quote unquote peasant, you probably are going to be outside a lot. You're probably going to be working in the sun. You might even be barefoot with more regularity. So you're going to be in nature. You're probably going to be not traveling a ton and this jet set lifestyle where you have a bunch of kind of basic cursory relationships, but not a lot of like close, meaningful relationships where maybe you live with your grandparents or your parents and you have like a tribe of people around you. What are some of the other things that we could learn from quote unquote peasant lifestyles as an affluent culture from your perspective?
Well, I think we should be decoupling it from affluence and poverty. So you take Kentucky. Several counties in Kentucky are among the poorest in America. They have their counties, their life expectancy is 22 years less than Boulder, Colorado, and Santa Barbara, California, where there are rich people. But you look at Santa Barbara and Boulder, both cities in which I've lived, and they have enlightened leadership that makes sure their streets are built for not just cars, but humans. So a significant amount of the unconscious physical activity, probably 8 to 12,000 steps a day, is because people can safely and pleasantly make it to school. Kids can walk to school and walk to their friend's house or walk to work or walk to get their cup of coffee, which you can't do in these Kentucky suburban automobile-based communities. So it's not a question of affluence or you have to be a peasant to reap the benefits. I have a company, Blue Zones LLC, and we get hired by insurance companies and healthcare systems to come into cities, bring this ethos, this approach of making people healthier by setting them up for success, by shaping their political environment, policy environment, their schools, their restaurants, their grocery store, their streets. So the healthy choice is easier, unavoidable. And in every one of my cities, we've seen BMI drop. That means the obesity rate drops, well-being goes up. And I don't change the affluence of that city necessarily. I just set up the nudges and defaults. And I've done them in big cities. Fort Worth, Texas. If you look into it, if you Google Blue Zones in Fort Worth, Texas, you'll see we dropped the BMI about 3% in that city of 980,000 people. And we saved them about $250 million a year. Not by talking them into going to expensive concierge doctors or getting prescriptions of Ozempic or rapamycin. We simply made Fort Worth, Texas more walkable, connected people socially, got the soda pops out of school vending machines, put fresh fruits and vegetables in the poor neighborhoods, in the bodegas. So the answer is not a silver bullet. The answer is silver buckshot of setting up nudges and defaults, a healthy swarm to nudge people into slightly better behaviors. It has to be ubiquitous and comprehensive and set up right. But what it is, you can see an enormous difference in people's life expectancy, no matter how much money they make.
What do you think of Brian Johnson? What do you think the concept of don't die? What do you think of like the general status of the longevity movement in the United States?
Well, I like Brian Johnson, and I applaud his innovative spirit. I do think that within our lifetimes, we're going to see something that an intervention that comes along that occasions a huge jump in life expectancy. I don't think any of the things Brian's doing is going to do that. Taking plasma from younger people or these experimental injections and so forth. Um, but I would never experiment on myself. I think the potential downside of these things is greater than the potential upside. I agree with his diet. I agree with his exercise regimen. I agree with sleep. I think he's got a lot more friends now than he used to have, which is a good thing. So, I have nothing negative to say about Brian Johnson. I do worry, though, that people are being deluded into thinking that they can take a pill or supplement or superfood, none of which have been shown to work in human beings. I think taking rapamycin is dangerous, even metformin, dangerous. My neighbor lives in Fisher Island. You know where Fisher Island? I went over to his house one night I was invited for dinner. He wasn't there. Turns out he was in Central America getting stem cells, and it killed him. His blood clotted. He had an embolism and died. We don't think about that when we sort of wantonly shoot ourselves up with these stem cells, unknown quality. And there's no proof that they work and doing anything other than reducing inflammation for a period. So, I think if you want to live a longer time right now, follow the Blue Zone's way, and that'll give you an extra decade, which stacks the deck in favor of being around when that intervention comes, when that breakthrough comes. That really does add years to our lives. And also to remember, a lot of these longevity bros, they're pump iron and take these pills and stick a needle in your belly and take Ozempic. First of all, I don't think they work. But even if they did, in many cases, these are just prolonging a shitty life. If you look at the lives of people in blue zones, it's joyous. They live close to nature. They grow their own food. They sit down to dinner with their families. They spend time face to face with their friends. They have village festivals. They have a spiritual life. It's a wonderful life. You were asking me about happiness at the top of this. At the end of the day, we don't just want longevity. We want happiness. We want quality of life. And the beauty of Blue Zones is it offers both, and with a deeper underpinning of evidence than any of these other nostrums and marketing schemes.
It seems like things come back. They go from simplicity to complexity and then back to simplicity again. It seems like a lot of the highest leverage tools or activities or lifestyle choices for longevity and health
I think the cycle is when something comes along that tells us that it's healthy to do something that we like to eat or like to do, it gets popular in a hurry. For example, Atkins, 20, 25 years ago, you're probably too young. There was this craze around the Atkins diet that told us we can eat bacon and pork chops and be heart healthy. And it failed. Atkins himself dropped dead of a heart attack at age 68, and then there was this flurry of the paleo diet. Well, that's fallen away. Now, you have these protein obsessed carnivores, and anything that gives us permission to eat pork chops and steaks and these things we like to do We love to glom onto that science, and it comes and goes. But the things that really work aren't sexy. I can't sell you anything. I can't make any money off of you by uh, showing you that having a sense of purpose adds 8 years. Um, there's not a lot of money in beans or broccoli or bulgur, but these foods, beyond a shadow of a doubt, are good for our hearts. They're full of fiber. They're good for our guts. They lower our chances of cancer of the GI tract. There's no money in them. So we're not bombarded with, that messages to consume them, and they're not front of mind, and they're not sexy. So, we don't adopt them, but they work.
What are your thoughts on tobacco usage in relation to longevity and health?
There's no question it shaves a decade or so off your life expectancy. I mean, it's like a little bit like asking me, what do I think of a heroin habit? I mean, it's just so common knowledge. I think by now that smoking is gonna.
I think the story that I have of some of like blue zone type people or places where, people are just naturally healthy. I think one of the stories that I have is, like you mentioned, they're not really doing anything and they're coming back and they're having a glass of wine, and, they roll up a cigarette every now and again or smoke a cigar, and, they're 110 years old and they're still drinking a shot of whiskey each day. Like, that's kind of like a trope that I hear. Do you think that there's not any relevance of that, or that's just they happen to have longevity in lieu of those things? What about alcohol?
We're all allocated genes when we're born, and they're a tiny percentage, less than 1% of people will be dead by age 10 because they got a bad hand. Is that your girlfriend? Just kidding. That was terrible. I don't know why I said that. Sorry about that.
She is my bitch. It's a female dog.
Well, we love her. By the way, owning dogs is associated with more life expectancy. So
I would guarantee that.
And dogs are long-term adventures. So big blue zone intervention there.
They take you outside. They connect you with people. They take you back to like all the simple, free, basic, fundamental things of life that when we get excessively complex, I think we get further away from the things that actually heal us. I think it's pretty like nature does a job. Live a life that puts you in nature more often. You'll be way ahead of the curve of most people. Domestication, I think, is probably one of the greatest burdens that we have to our health, broadly speaking. Excessive domestication.
Yes, I call it the obsession with comfort. Almost everything that helps us live longer involves a little stress, and I mean, exercise is a stressor. Intermittent fasting is a stressor. But dogs are great because the dog needs to get walked every day, and so too the human gets walked. And every time you pet a dog, your cortisol, i.e., your stress hormone levels go down, and their companionship and the only product that I endorse is something called Get Joy dog food. People say, why do you endorse dog food? And I answer because, first of all, I believe dogs will help you live longer, and I believe we ought to be helping them live longer as well. And it's this beautiful symbiotic relationship. And Get Joy has this actually real whole food, dog food that's fresh and not just some sort of dried garbage that some people feed their dogs. But anyway, we got sidetracked. What were we talking about?
Something else with the dog, something I noticed. I was just actually out at Pura Vida here in South Beach, and I had my dog with me, and I was actually preparing for this conversation, and a girlfriend came by, and she sat down, and then
two-legged girlfriend this time.
Two-legged girlfriend, yeah, exactly. Not my bitch. And so she came and sat down, and we're petting. Of course, like the dog comes up, and the dog gets on my lap. And then the girl's like, oh my God, she's so cute. This is so precious. And we're petting the dog, and we're like petting the dog together. And, it's like a cute, sweet moment. We're kind of like, our hands are touching. It's like, this is kind of sweet. The dog brings you towards people, and people bring you towards safety and healing and health.
That's a great insight. I'd never thought of that. That's a great insight. You're absolutely right.
And so many people, they live in these very secular, kind of disassociated, separate lives. and we feel alone, man. Like loneliness is like a an epidemic for people, and people are silently suffering, and the feeling of purpose and joie de vivre and all that stuff. If you don't have anyone to live for, it's like what's the point? I think a lot of people are in that place.
We all get sucked into this thing, and we lose the skill of connecting, of building social connection, of meeting somebody, moving that from a new meeting to an acquaintance to a friend, and a friend to a deep, intimate a fellow human, a brother, sister. And um, I think, to your point, a dog can really facilitate that very first connection that makes a really big difference.
Yeah, connecting is scary.
See, I mean, you're such a great podcaster, uh, Aaron, that your guests learn from you.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I wrote, this is my world. I wrote a book about a whole section of the book is literally exactly what you're talking about, changing your environment to change your physiology. Because my belief is that I think fitness is kind of ridiculous for the most part if you're not actually addressing the root cause of your lifestyle. So doing little things like put a pull-up bar in your house, then naturally you'll swing on the pull-up bar when you walk through. Throw things down on the ground, floor cushions, yoga mat, stuff like that. So naturally you get up and down off of the ground with regularity. Little things like that in the aggregate, make a massive difference towards longevity. And I'm personally not impressed by like fitness culture, even though I'm like very much involved in it. So I appreciate.
By the way, the longest lived women in the history of the world are from Okinawa, Japan. And if you go into their house, traditional houses, there's no furniture. There might be a small table and a tatami mat and a very thin futon. But you're right. Until they're hundreds, they're getting up and down 30, 40 times a day.
Yeah, and the adult diaper industry is already, if I believe already or very soon, will exceed that of the baby diaper industry in the United States. The incidence of osteoarthritis is very minimal in cultures that get up and down off of the ground with regularity, such as Okinawa.
That's very interesting.
And so we're addressing these issues with, big surgeries and big medicine and big drugs and, big solutions, big complex solutions. Meanwhile, there's a gal, squatting to poop in the morning every day and then getting down and washing her clothes by a river. And her body just works because she's not going against her evolution or physiology. We have all the onboard systems to repair and heal and restore ourselves. It's when we divorce ourselves of that, that's when things start to fail. And then if we're seeking technology as a solution, we're lost. And I think it gets biblical. I think it becomes kind of like the eye of the camel thing.
I could not agree more. You've done a lot of thinking, I can tell you. All these hosts, you've synthesized, I believe, the right conclusion. So, well, listen. When I come back to Miami, let's hang out. I'll bike up to your place, or you can walk down to mine, and we'll take this into the real world.
Yeah, you'll love this. I sold my car. I drove out here from Austin, Texas, but I sold my car a few months ago, and I'm like, now I look at people with cars, I'm like, suckers.
Yeah, exactly. There's traffic all the time. You don't. And by the way, you can bike, Puerto Vita or whatever. There's no parking outside of Puerto Vita. You can bike right up there and lock your bike on the parking meter and right next to the front door. And I have a 7-year-old car, and I maybe drive it once a month. I pick somebody up in the airport or something, but I bike everywhere. Yeah, I bike on the beach.
Yeah, the car would just certainly collect dirt. That was a guarantee, and occasionally collect new scratches. And I was just like, what am I doing? And then the other thing, this is the last thing I say with the bike. If you do that, like changing your environment, now if I take a girl on a date or something like that, if it's like a date, we can get an Uber, but she rides in the back of me with the bike. This creates touch. We're in a touch deprived culture, and so we're scared of touch. And touch is either it's sexualized or violence. We don't have like this in between spectrum of physical touch.
You're dating from another different pool South Beach girls than I know of. I mean, they're more interested in riding the back of a Ferrari than the back of a bike. You're
Yeah, they're not my people. I appreciate you, man. It was really good. So the cookbook is coming out.
It's out on September 2nd, available everywhere. It's called the Blue Zone Kitchen One Pot, and it's the 100 recipes formulated for longevity. We worked with the Stanford lab to identify the flavor profiles that Americans love the most, scraped 650,000 recipes to find the code, and that code is in this book. My the prequel to this book, The Blue Zone Kitchen, was a number one New York Times bestseller. I think this one's going to be even bigger. The Blue Zone's Kitchen One Pot Meals. You'd do me a solid if you check it out. And it was a pleasure talking to you, Aaron. If any of your guests have more questions, I can be reached on Instagram at Dan Buettner. You can direct message me, and I'll answer you at Dan Buettner. It's really been a delight.
Yeah, and you're launching a podcast, are you not?
Launching a podcast, the Dan Buettner podcast, and it's wherever you get your podcast, you can see it. If you Google my name and podcast, we already have a trailer out. I'd love it if you take a look at it.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate your work. I actually reference the Blue Zones in my book. So thanks for the work that you do. And thank you all for tuning in. That is it. That's all. I'll see you next week.